Indians, Native Americans, American Indians, and First Nation. What comes to mind when you hear these terms? Regina Washtagalagal is an office manager and technician in a veterinary clinic in Ojai, California. With her in the interview are her son, Joshua, an HIV/AIDS counselor, and her mother, Juanita Flores, a homemaker. Beverly Folks is an office administrator in Calabasas and the mother of 6 grown children. She lives in Thousand Oaks. Julie Tumamite Stensley is a storyteller and consultant for the Ventura History Museum and a mother raising 3 children. Ted Garcia is the father of 4 adult children. He's retired from the United States Postal Service. 3 of his children still work at the post office. One daughter is a teacher in Oxnard. Ted Jr., Dennis, and Denise joined their father in this video interview. The Garcias are a close-knit family, and they enjoy spending time together. Alan Salazar is a maintenance worker at Rancho El Chorro, an environmental outdoor school located near San Luis Obispo. All of these people have one thing in common. They are Chumash. Forefathers of the Chumash Indians settled in California at least 15,000 years ago. Historically, the Chumash, as a cultural group, maintained a significant population with numerous and separate villages. These villages stretched northwest from the Los Angeles County line to the region known today as San Luis Obispo, and from the Pacific Ocean eastward to Kern County. Today, there are hereditary Chumash living throughout Southern California. In this series of videos, you will meet some of the coastal Chumash.
I'm Beverly Folks. I'm a Chumash elder. I'm Ventureño Chumash, and my ancestry is from the Topo Canyon in the Simi Valley Mountains.
Hello, welcome to my home in Miners Oaks in the Ojai Valley. I'm Julie Tumamite Stensley, and this is my daughter Paula. You.
Hi, I'm Regina Washtagalagal. I'm a traditional Ventureño Barbareño Chumash from the coast of California.
I'm Ted Garcia, and I'm a member of the Chumash tribe.
Hello, my name is Ted Garcia, and I'm a member of the Chumash Tataviam.
Hello, my name is Denise Garcia, and I'm a member of the Chumash tribe.
Hello, my name is Dennis Garcia, and I'm a member of the Chumash tribe.
Hi, we're here at Rancho El Chorro Outdoor Environmental School.
Throughout American history, Indians have been stereotyped. This presentation examines some aspects of contemporary life of this indigenous group by talking with several descendants of early California coastal Chumash.
Keeping my mother's stories alive, keeping the ancestors alive, is what I'm most proud of.
Out at the islands, you know, there's so much erosion out there, you can look up at cliffs and you can see layers of bodies. And those eventually drop into the ocean, and that's the natural progression of things. Yeah. It's when things are rooted up or brought up during construction that it tends to be a problem. Right. I'm what they call a most likely descendant, which is state recognized, so that if remains are found, I'm one of the people that they will call. They have 24 hours to call me or one of the other MLDs and have us decide what we want to do. And the options are to rebury in another location, to have them build over the top of them, you know, just adding more soil, or to have the business reroute around them. Well, many times that's not really an option, even though they say it is. It's not really. When you have a company that's putting millions and millions of dollars into something, you're going to butt heads trying to get them to reroute.
You know, this whole area is Chumash territory. all in here, all the way from San Luis Obispo. They filtered down the coast as far as Encino and inland as far as Valencia area, which is now Valencia area, Newhall.
What the children are missing is this face, is this body, and this, to let them know that it isn't something that's happened in the past. It's still happening. We're still here. We can present ourselves with our own culture.
I mean, how can it hurt just to ask a question? You know, just to say, hey, I don't know anything about your culture. You know, do you guys do this or whatever? And if somebody's going to get mad at you for asking that, that's not because they're offended. It's because they're rude and they're not being tolerant of somebody's curiosity.
When I went into the higher grade, the middle school and the high school, well, in those days it was middle school and high school together, and there was a little prejudice, you know. There was a lot of one culture in that area, and I think sometimes they just didn't understand if you weren't what they were.
I still to this day get things like, oh, you Indian giver. I'll hear someone say that and I'll go, hello, you know. That annoys me. I mean, I think that's a really inappropriate thing to say. Or somebody that'll say, oh, come on, let's go powwow and stuff when they're going to go have a talk and stuff, when they don't really understand the origin of powwow, you know. So it's little things like that, but you can't get pissed at them because it's just stuff that people don't know. You have to educate people, you know.
Children learn Indians from television, first of all. And it's so hard to get rid of those stereotypes of Native Americans. Even today, when I talk about Native American culture and I ask people, did Chumash people live in teepees? How many of you believe that? And they all go, I do. I said, no, we didn't have teepees. And you know, people today, oh, well, you guys lived off buffalo. No, we didn't have buffalo here. There's such a stereotype in how people view Native American culture that we all sound alike, we all dressed alike, we all did the same woo 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 woo, you know, all these different noises.
Most people
know that
now, that they're not portrayed particularly well, especially in movies. When you see old movies that, oh my goodness. And what's funny about the old movies is the Indians are talking and they're swearing. They're saying the worst things in like their language.
Yeah, in the John Wayne movies, you know, they were always the Comanches or whatever, but they were certain Navajo people that were always used, and they're speaking their own language, and they're saying really funny things.
Foul funny things.
Yeah, really funny things, and it's funny when you go listen to the playbacks and stuff, and you hear what they're saying, and you're kind of going, I wonder if that John Ford knew they were saying that.
I think we still do not totally understand and appreciate Native American culture and Native American beliefs.
I think we're getting there, like, for instance, interviews like this, and most of us who are out there passing the word on, but they haven't been accurate. I think a lot of the things that you read about, some are true, some are fact, some aren't. But we're changing it, and it is changing. And I think the newer books that are coming out are helpful in that respect.
And we're just now starting to appreciate that Indian peoples were not just hunters and gatherers. They were philosophers. We were entrepreneurs. We traded extensively. So I still think we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go.
I've had kids ask me when I'm doing cultural diversity, I usually go in regalia, and you dance, and then you tell stories, and then you answer questions. And they'll ask if I live in a teepee. And I say, no, I live in a little house with electricity and running water, and I don't wear these every day. I wear regular clothes, and this is just what I wear to dance in, and dancing is ceremony.
So children are learning that we did these things. We used to be that way. We had those things. And I'm trying to say, no, we still do. We're still living in some ways in those ways and doing those things. No, we don't live in the ops anymore. We have a car. We live in, but we can recreate a Chumash village and lifestyle if we wish to.
For those people who live traditionally, it's called being on the Red Road. And there are houses all through the United States that are considered traditional homes, which means whether you know the people or not, everybody kind of knows where those houses are or who those families are. And when you're traveling, you know you can go there to get a meal or use the shower or sleep.
It might be on the floor, but
yeah,
they're welcome.
So our house has always been a traditional house, meaning that sometimes there may be people that you don't know. They come and say, such and such said you're a traditional home. I need a place to stay, and they come in.
I always say that I don't think I do anything differently except pay more attention to when my mother was telling those stories, that I used to think she was just talking about the olden days, not think when I was a little girl. Do I have to hear this again about the olden days? And I realize now, being a mother and a grandmother myself, that what she was doing was wanting to educate us and wanting us to know the history and about our ancestry so that we would remember. And I realized the same thing, because I now too do the same thing with my children and grandchildren. So that they will know when I'm gone, and the stories will be passed on.
I was born in San Fernando, California in 1951.
I was born in San Fernando, out in the San Fernando Valley, but the town of San Fernando. I was born in May. And do I have to tell you the year? Okay.
I was born here in Ventura, but my parents were already living in Miners Oaks, which is a little city just outside of the Ojai Valley. It's part of the Ojai Valley. And I was raised down in what we call the river bottom of Ventura, just right along the Ventura River. Beautiful place to grow up as a child. It was all full of nature, and we were only one of a few families that lived down in that area.
Well, I had 2 sisters and 3 brothers, and my siblings, because I was the youngest of 6 children, kind of were like parents in a way. They were older than me, and except for my one brother there's like about a 7 or 8 year difference, but so they were already ready to leave home and getting married, and I did an awful lot of things with them, like I'd go on their vacations with their husbands, and so I was kind of raised with parents and siblings.
I'm the youngest of 7. I have 3 older brothers and 3 older sisters.
I lived with my mom growing up. My dad left, I think I was 6 or 7.
Yeah, about 7, yeah.
And he was a sheriff. He was the very first undercover narcotics officer in Ventura County. And most of the work that he did was in the city of Saticoy, Ventura. And that's where I was growing up.
And the kids just keep coming back. It's always been one of those houses where there was snacks after school, and, are you staying for dinner? Let me know. We'll set another place. So it was just a safe place for people to come, for kids to come, and they're still coming.
That I was raised by both my mom and my grandma, and even though there were male figures, because I think of all of my uncles as being like father figures of sorts, and then, my mom had a boyfriend from the time I was like 4 years old?
You were 2.
Oh, okay. 2 until I was 8 or 9, that I thought of as my father, and then when she got remarried when I was 11 years old, and he adopted me and was like a father figure to me. She's still always been the disciplinarian.
My mother was a homemaker. My father was a cement finisher in construction, and he worked for the studios. And those were the days when they used to do the sets at, the various studios, Paramount and RKO and all the old-time studios. Now they go out on location, but not then.
Like most young people, we never thought we were poor or middle class or anything. I mean, we had enough food and clothes to get by. So
I would say, and this wasn't always the way for them, because my older brothers and sisters were raised during a time when it was like, maybe not the real depression, but, kind of tighter times. by the time I came along, my parents, being the youngest, were very well set. I would say they were probably middle upper class family is what we probably were. You know, I went to a private school. I really never wanted for anything, so I was very fortunate.
Mom was the boss.
Yeah,
My dad worked, and my father, you know, he worked hard, and he was gone, you know, till she had it all structured. You know, you got up in the morning, you had breakfast, she sent you off to school, and starched clothes like this, you know, and you came home for lunch because we lived close to the school, and after school we did our homework and played and stuff, and at 6 o'clock you better be at that table because that's what time dinner is. My mother had it very structured for us, and my father worked a lot, you know, sometimes mostly 6 days a week, sometimes 7. So she was the law of the land in the house. She, you know, well, she was the one there to take care of us, and she was the one that laid down the law. And you know, some people might call it strict, but it was. I see children today that don't have respect for their parents, and I don't know, a little whack across the butt don't hurt.
Who had the authority? I'd have to say my mother, more so than probably my father.
And she's a big influence in my life. She's in my heart because she's the one that always told us that we were Indian people, and they had us labeled wrong, you know, because of the language that was spoken by our ancestors. But she always let us, don't let anybody ever tell you any different. You're Indian people, and that's who you are. And so that's always stuck with me, and that's what really drives me when I do my singing or my dance or whatever.
You know, there's quite a few. My great-grandfather was killed by a bear in the Lancaster Mountains, and they're always, especially the younger grandchildren, are always interested in that. and then, of course, my great-great-grandfather came from the village of Tapo, which is in the Simi Valley Mountains, and they're always very interested in that. And he was considered a mission favorite, and with the Padres' permission was allowed to cultivate some land, and that land turned out to be 1 league of land. And there is a monument today that still stands. It's at the Los Encinos Historical Park, and it does bear my great-great-grandfather's name and a great-great-uncle, as there's 3 Indians that once owned that land, and their names are on it. So we're very proud of that.
I always looked at my grandmother as being a healer. She was one that people came to, or brought their children to, or she went to heal them.
I believe one thing that I remember is my parents were never married in the church, and when I was probably about, I want to say maybe 8, they married in the church at Santa Barbara Mission. And that was a very exciting time for me. I was at that time going to a parochial school.
Father and my older sister, and she actually was the only care for him besides my father. When he came home and he helped him turn her, you know, he would help my mother turn my great-grandfather, and you know, but she washed him and shaved him and cleaned him, you know, and fed him. She, you know, so, you know, I think a lot about my mother. My earliest memory is my mother and how she took care of everybody.
Well, when I was growing up, my mother, who knew the history and very well, always told us of our grandfather who lived in the area in Encino, California, and told us all about his mission days. He was a mission Indian. And he lived at the mission and told all about the good and bad, you know, told us about his upbringing. So that was very exciting. And I realized today that she did that to make sure we knew the history of our, you know, our background, our ancestor.
My happiest was when I got a little kitten. We didn't really have a lot of pets. We had chickens. And we had an older dog that was my sister's. And my saddest memory was when my brother let it go, and it was crying out in the fields, and I couldn't find it. And it was late at night, so I was really sad. And my uncle Hoven had given me the kitten. Part of some of my happiest memories were sitting in these fields out there, just playing with ladybugs and collecting ladybugs and daydreaming. And you know, when we got together, having older sisters, Saturday mornings we danced to American Bandstand. So that was always a fun memory.
Probably Christmas. But you know, my mother was big on holidays. She was one of these type of mothers that made Valentine's Day a big deal. And so she was always the type that, you know, 4th of July, Easter, whatever it was. But holiday time, Thanksgiving, because it was so more family. You know, and I grew up in a large family.
The thing that struck me the most is my mother told me about my great-grandfather when he was in L.A. somewhere, and some man looked at me and he says, well, what are you? My great-grandfather looked at me and says, I'm a human being. Yeah. So I look at it that, you know, that's my view on us all. Because we share the same grandfather, we walk on the same grandmother. We may have different religions, we may be different colors, we may have different politics, but we're all human beings. And that's the thing that matters the most.
I grew up, I was fortunate. I know that there's a lot of Native American people out there today that didn't even know about their Native American heritage until later in life. But I grew up knowing about my Native American heritage. I grew up in, like I said, the town of San Fernando, and we were considered the Indian family that lived there. So, and of course, it was in the time when it was small and just a few families.
Well, when I was 2, we left San Fernando and moved to Hanford, which is a rural country area, and we had a couple acres. My dad wanted all his kids to have horses and experience that country life. When he was a young boy, San Fernando was a rural area, and it was quickly developing even in the 50s and into a more suburban area. So we moved up to Hanford. So I grew up out in the country, had dogs and chickens and horses and things. Once again, we kind of had that overall Native American belief. When we left San Fernando, my dad got a small pup, and I literally grew up with that dog, Tiny, and I didn't treat him like other kids treated their other dog. I never tried to teach Tiny how to retrieve. Tiny would go rabbit hunting with me. Tiny was more my confidant. I treated him like he had a spirit, and you know, I'd get mad at Tiny, then I'd feel bad because I got mad at Tiny.
We didn't know prejudice. We didn't know anything. We used to have dances, and we danced with the black girls and stuff like that.
Our sister's best friend was Japanese American. Yeah. But we didn't know there was a different. I was 16 years old before I was subjected to racial prejudice, and I didn't know they were talking about me. I was shocked. Like, what?
You know.
And it hurt, and it made me realize that what other cultures had been subjected to, because we were never taught that. We were never taught that, you know, oh, they're this or they're that. We were taught that they were our friends, they were people, they were neighbors, they were just people in the town.
My eldest brother was in World War II, and he served closely with the Navajo code talkers, and they kind of took him under his wing because he too was Native American, so they kind of had that bond, you know, when they met.
We've always known who we are. My grandmother never let us forget it, and it was always. I remember going to a friend's house or people's house where they're Mexican people, and they would speak to me in Spanish, and I'd go, I don't speak Spanish. And they said, what kind of Mexican are you? And I said, well, I'm not Mexican, I'm Indian. And it was usually the grandmothers, because a lot of Latin families have the grandmother live with. Mm-hmm. And this one lady one time was speaking to me in Spanish, and I said, no, I don't speak Spanish. And she says, well, what kind of Mexican are you? And I said, well, I'm Indian. She says, well, next time someone speaks to you in Spanish, just say that you don't speak Spanish. and she says, "Soy indio," meaning I'm Indian,
Mhm.
and they'll understand. So, because we could be Latin people, you know, we could be Mexican, you know, and we do have Mexican blood, but, you know, we also have French and English blood.
Yeah.
I learned about death at an early age because, you know, we had a colt die when it was about 3 or 4 days old that got sick at birth. And I literally held the colt's head in my lap as it took its last gas. And when you live in the country, you learn about, you know, life and birth and death. And, you know, those were the lessons my dad, you know, wanted us to learn. And I, you know, I think it's a good life living out in the country.
So, we just did the normal things. I mean, the beach was our home, and baseball, beach, and hanging out with friends was our lifestyle back then.
I started learning about my native Chumash background. I learned that we didn't have clans. We grew up, because of my mother's influence being Spanish Indian, Mexican Indian, we grew up in a Spanish household, eating a lot of Mexican Spanish food. Spanish was spoken in the house, and so it wasn't until, we always knew we were Native American though, we always knew that part of us, and my father's side was Chumash, partly because of our name, our surname, Tumamayat. The name comes from my great-grandfather, Juan de Jesus Tumamayat, who was born here in Ventura in 1811, and later as an adult became a captain or major domo around here with the Spanish government. He was given the name Tumamayat as a result of his parents dying as a young boy. He was about 6, 7, or 8 when one died, and then a year and a half later the next parent died. So he was raised by his grandparents. And so the people called him Tumamayat, and as an adult he wanted to keep that name as a surname. We're the only family who have maintained that surname, a Chumash name. It was said to have meant an orphan, one who carries things on their back. And the, I think it was the church found the name Marquez. They would just pick a name. You know, it's like when they were baptized. They'd become walking down the church aisle, and they'd be given a Spanish name, Juana Maria, Juana Escusa, you know, all these different names, a first name in the Spanish language, and then their Indian names were dropped. Well, he thought to himself, no, I think I'm going to keep Tumamayat, because he'd already been baptized Juan de Jesus. He didn't have an Indian name when he was born, so he kept that. So that's, we always have known with that name that we were Chumash.
My siblings, my brothers and sisters, were all a little bit age spread apart, so we were allowed to, I was the baby of the family for a while, then my little brother came along and he was baby of the family. My brother's 4 years older than me, so for 4 years he was the baby of the family. My sister's 8 years older than me, so for 4 years she was the baby of the family, and she got attention. And my dad always felt that it was important that the baby of the family get a lot of attention, so he tried to give each one of his children to make them feel that special, and all of us had a very close relationship with our parents, and I think that's why. But then when you have older brothers and sisters, I don't care what your culture is, you know, it's the older brothers and sisters' job to torment the younger brothers and sisters. So yes, at a young age I was told that I was adopted. They found me out in the mountains and I was raised by wolves.
Yes, Poe. We was Poe. We didn't have a lot, but we had each other, and what we had, we appreciated.
Well, I mean,
we didn't know we were poor. We didn't.
It's like you like my brother's talking about. You know, he was disappointed with Christmas because, you know, didn't get, you know, these kids got new bikes every year. You know, we're going, God, we got a bike about 5 years ago. You know, and
maybe.
But you always got, you know, shoes and socks and underwear and stuff like that. That's stuff that you needed. You had to, you know, and it's like, but you know, I don't know. I think it made us better people. You know, we were, you know, we weren't.
Well,
you know,
we
had a roof over our
different.
head and we had food on the table. Okay,
Right.
And we had each other. So it's like, you know, poor is all, you know, how you look at it.
Our name Chumash is a generic term in itself. It's not what we called ourselves. It comes from a word, Mek Chumash, which is what these mainland coastal people called the island peoples, called place of the islanders or makers of shell bead money. An anthropologist, I think it was Powell, came along and just shortened us to Chumash by our linguistic pattern, that we all had this similar linguistic pattern but separate dialects that were similar.
You know, this whole area is Chumash territory, all in here, all the way from San Luis Obispo. They filtered down the coast as far as Encino and inland as far as Valencia area, which is now Valencia area, Newhall.
Well, to become federally recognized is a huge process. So we've been banding together and meeting on a monthly basis. So I organize these people, and I give them a place where we can come together, and then hopefully give them incentive by the things that I've been doing in my life. Two of the criteria that we have to satisfy the federal government is to show a continuous line of political activities pre-mission to post-mission. There's about a 30-year gap that we have to satisfy with answering it very carefully, is why we don't have that political continuity. But on either end, my great-grandfather had that connection with the Spanish, and then post-mission, there are members of our families who have fought in government trying to preserve cultural sites, and then I have been working with federal government for the last 15, 16 years. So there's that little space that we have to satisfy.
The most important thing, of course, for Chumash people is to be buried facing west, because that signifies the completion of your life. We're born of the east, so you're facing west when you die. A lot of times when I do a sensitive site, because I monitor sensitive sites for archaeologists and for construction as well, and you'll find if they accidentally come upon what they consider burial sites, the remains will always be facing west. So if they're not facing west, it's generally because they were up higher and water washed them down, they tumbled, or they did not complete their life in a good way. And it was a punishment, basically, to not be facing west.
My youngest son would go out to the islands and monitor the burial sites there, but because of so much wash away, and they would wash the burial sites out, and he'd go re-inter them and make sure that they were in the proper way.
Spiritually, show a continuity in your religious culture pre-mission to post-mission. Again, there's a little gap there where people were punished for doing their religious practices and speaking their language. So we've satisfied that criteria by that answer in itself. We weren't allowed to. Some people did it in secret and wouldn't talk about it. So, you know, we have the language there.
As a traditional, my home is traditional as well, which means that on the Red Road, any traditional person needing a place to stay or to eat or to use the phone, to use the shower, I could come home from work and there could be someone in my home that I've never met before, but it's an open home, a welcome home for any traditional needing those services when they're far away from home.
Peoples were taken off their coastline villages along Ventura, Santa Barbara, Malibu, when the missionaries let them go and enslaved them. They weren't given back their villages in Malibu. Are you kidding? They weren't even given their land back here in the interior of Ventura because there was oil in the ground. So Native peoples were given the shaft and not given back their lands. Like in San Ynez, the reason they have federal recognition is that San Ynez the mission had about 300 acres they needed to give away, or they wanted to give away. So they happened to give it to those 5 families living there at San Ynez at the time. And here, none of us were given we were given little houses along Ventura Avenue with a little bit of land around it. And at that time, I think my grandfather's taxes were 67 cents.
So, no, I felt very connected. And I think part of that was probably because my mother always made sure that we knew about our Native American heritage. She talked about it a lot. She told about stories and incidents and things that happened.
But, you know, people didn't own land. The idea of owning land was not something that even Chumash people pre-mission, you survived off the land, you worked with the land, you preserved, and you didn't cultivate the land because we weren't farmers.
My grandpa was shanghaied, into the British Navy when he was 16. He was a Chumash, and he had run away from home because of the poor treatment. And he decided he was going to see the world later on, and took off for San Francisco and was, he woke up aboard ship. He was pressed, as they called it. But he enjoyed it. He went around the world several times.
My great-great-grandfather was killed by a bear up in
Vasquez Rocks? No.
Little Rock Dam.
Little Rock Dam. They were chopping wood up there, and evidently this here bear was a female, and she had a cub around her somewhere. So she attacked my great-great-grandfather, and he had to fight her off. He killed the bear, but he died from the wounds that the bear had given because, but he killed her with an axe.
People are afraid of Native American spirituality, and they don't recognize it yet as another form of religion. They think, oh, peyote, oh, evil spirits. You know, they don't look at Native American religion in a more sincere earth medicine. Right away, oh, you're doing witchcraft.
Today's lessons in history and current events are a good example. I mean, I am just disgusted and upset like anyone else when I hear of these beheadings in Iraq and of the cruelty of war that is going on today. But most Californians do not know that there were bounties given out in the 1850s, 1860s, up into the 1870s for Indian scalps and Indian heads. That if someone brought in the scalp of an Indian in the 1850s and 1860s, they were given $2. If someone brought in the head of an Indian, they were given $5.
Here in California, when the Spanish came over, it was not their goal to annihilate or kill us, because they didn't want to do the work. They weren't about to, put their hands and do that work themselves. So they saw the Native American here as a resource, and they're the ones who are going to do the work. And then certain missionaries at that time saw the ill treatment of Native American peoples and said, you know, these people have a soul. And no, they don't. They don't have a soul. They're not Christians. So, but he convinced them, the powers that be, that Native peoples do have a soul. And when they finally recognized that they did have a soul, they had to let them go. They couldn't enslave their own.
So, see, I think wherever Native American people go, they always connect to other Native American people. You just know. You can walk into a room, a restaurant, something, you just kind of know each other. There's that, I don't know, that sense about it.
I grew up as a traditional. I always knew that I was Chumash, and I always knew our stories growing up and where our creation stories, where we came from, where we were going in the next place. I also explored modern Christianity growing up. My mother left it very open for us to go explore different things. So I explored Baptists, Pentecostal, Christian, and Catholicism, and ultimately found that the way I was being raised was the appropriate way for me and for my son. I have a 28-year-old son, and he follows the same path.
We were all raised Catholic. We went to Catholic school. I went to Catholic school. Her and I went to Catholic school for 10 years.
10 years.
He went for like
I
10.
graduated from Catholic high school.
I was not raised in a religious atmosphere at all. My dad used to say, God is God. And because my grandpa kind of influenced it there because of the church. The Catholic Church is anathema to the Chumash people. We were their slaves, and they decimated us. And the Catholic Church was right up the road. And I'm very uncomfortable in a Catholic church. I know what happened, and I want nothing to do with it. It's a very painful thing to think about.
Yeah. We practiced, my mother was very devout Catholic, which I believe a lot of the Native American people were back then. My grandfather came from the San Fernando Mission, so he was raised with the Padres there.
I've come to a point of spirituality more than any structured religion, any rules or anything. You don't have to go once a week or anything. If I realize that the Native American, the Chumash people, it's not a once a week thing. It's not a there's no time that you have to set for it. You can pray anywhere, anytime where you want.
Like many California Indians, especially the California Indians that were around the missions, that were brought into the missions. I was raised as a Catholic. My grandmother was a good Catholic and never missed Mass, would go to Mass 2-3 times a week. My father, went to catechism and was an altar boy. And if you knew my father, that was quite an accomplishment, because he was also a Marine and a warrior and a soldier.
So, to me, formed religion creates problems. Manufactured religion creates problems. Instead of just living the way the earth works, the way things work, and just going with that, when you're guided by something that teaches, to me, many of those religions teach hate. That if you're a certain way, you're not going to this heaven place that they talk about. And if you don't do the way they say to do, you're going to this hell place that they talk about. And to me, I figure there's pretty much heaven and hell right here on earth, depending on how you choose to live your life. And you're going to pay for it in the next level, or you're going to be in a better place at the next level where you're learning even more, where some of those answers are going to come to you a little clearer.
My other family members are very devout to the church. Through my mother's orientation and all her upbringing, she traveled around with her parents like gypsies. They were the migrant people who came into California from Guanajuato, Mexico, back in the early 1900s. And families migrating from Mexico all the way to San Jose. We have relatives all up and down this coast. And she had only a 5th grade education, but she could read the Bible, both in English and in Spanish. So that was her formal education.
My father is still a very devout Catholic, and I have nothing against his beliefs at all, because everybody has to believe in something. Like, I believe it was Muhammad said, there are many paths to the top of the mountain. So if you have a spiritual, it's all about the golden rule. You treat people as you would you want to be treated.
It's about having a belief system is what it is. It's about having that belief system, that foundation that you have faith in something.
I think it helped me become who I am because in the days that I went to parochial school, and I think you can ask a lot of people this in my generation, we had nuns for teachers, not like today. And I think they probably were a little stricter, and it kind of made you a little bit more maybe conscientious, and I think we were a little bit more intimidated than today. I think children today are a little bit more, they question, where in our day we didn't. If this is what they said, this is what it was. And so I think I don't know, I'm not saying it made us a better person. I just think maybe we just were a little bit more intimidated.
And by the time I was born, they had separated, my parents had separated, and my father went to church for us. He never made us go to church. We would go at Easter, and we would go at Christmas Eve, but he never really made his youngest children go to church. So I never really, and I don't feel, I'm so much more broad-minded and open-minded to really feel that Jesus was a savior and a saint and a prophet, and he was human. I don't believe we came from Adam and Eve. We have all these traditional native stories that have us coming from the earth, and all tribal peoples have this belief that we are not, born out of this immaculate conception, but born from the earth, or in an upper world where we descend down into this middle earth. I think those are much more beautiful way of looking at life.
Even in our Chumash heritage, they're very spiritual people too, and so I think it kind of blends together. I mean, we do ceremonies, and it's not, of course, like at a church, but it's pretty close. I mean, we burn our sage, we say our prayer, and we have our meditation time. So I think they kind of go hand in hand.
I was not born given a traditional name, so I went through certain ceremonies. I went through cleansing ceremonies and then a name ceremony to earn that name. Basically, you go through a dream sleep, and then the spiritual advisor interprets the dream, and you're given a name based on that. And Huastikoliko means a small wild rose, very firmly rooted in one spot, but branching in many different directions. And that's pretty much me. I'm here, I'm always going to be here. I can't imagine living anywhere else. This is where I'm from, and this is where I love everything about this community and about the culture of my people in this community.
And I was raised as a Catholic, but as I got older, I started to get more involved with Native religion and Native beliefs. And as an adult, it was something that I always struggled with. And mostly what it was I just never felt comfortable in the church environment, in a building praying, and people dressed in suits and everything. And as I got older and started exploring, my Native beliefs and traditional Native American stories, I learned something that was probably an ancestral, something that when you're part of a culture and you do things and learn things over and over, there's certain things that are embedded, ingrained in you. You don't even realize it. And when I got older, I realized that, you know what, I'm a person of the earth. The Chumash people believe we came from the earth. One creation story says we came from the seeds of a plant. Another creation story says that the animals, that we have hands like the lizard. So we connected with the earth. We're connected with the animals. And I connected with that. So as an adult, I incorporate Native beliefs with what I consider American beliefs. So if a car pulls out in front of me and I almost get in an accident, I go, God, please help me. Yes, that's my Catholic religion. When I say my Thanksgiving prayer, I give thanks to Mother Earth and the Great Spirit.
Growing up, of course, I was raised traditionally, but she allowed me to basically search for whatever religion I would be interested in. And like, we were raised around Mormon people, so I hung around them, not realizing that I would never want to be a Mormon. And I started reading books about all different forms of religion, Buddhism,
Judaism.
And, just everything that I could get my hands on. And I like to think that I take the best parts of any religion and try to put that as part of my life. So
my grandfather was born at the mission, raised in the system, and I can tell you some stories that weren't really, were harsh. And even when I did some of my research and some of the stuff I found out. But you know what? We can't change what happened. All we can, or undo it. So all we can do is make sure it doesn't ever happen again.
These are just a few of the things we have here in our Chumash Museum, a small cultural center that we have here at Rancho El Charro. We have recreations, things that people have made that Chumash used for thousands of years, like these arrows, which are actually two pieces, so that if this part broke, you didn't have to make a whole new arrow out of it. Drills that are made out of stone, and these are used for drilling into wood or bone or anything that you needed to drill a hole with. Stone tools like knives made of obsidian blades, then tied to the wood handle there with sinew. The deer skin is not just for decoration or as a trophy the way American people, when they kill a deer, the Chumash hunters would use the deer skin with the antlers in the head and drape it over them so they would look like a deer and could actually get closer to the deer that they were hunting. But even the antlers, we would use the antlers as tools. You can use the tip of the antler to flake off the edge and make your stone blades get that sharp serrated edge on them. You can use the handle when you're working around a fire. So if you want to get a rock and put it in the fire and then remove it from the fire to heat the rocks, to use to heat food or in a sweat lodge and things like that. This piece of sandpaper, this is actually a skin of a shark. It looks like a piece of sandpaper, and that's what it was used for. The skin of a shark has that same feel and same effect as the modern sandpaper that we use today. It's very rough. You can use it to sand stone, bone, wood. We used it a lot on making our stone bowls, when we made our plank canoes to sand the boards down. So shark skin was an excellent form of sandpaper. Even the abalone shells, which now we use as decorations, and the colors are very pretty, but we use them for practical purposes. When you're in a canoe, the plank canoes all tend to leak, so we would take abalone shells along with us to bail the water out. You can also fill up the holes with asphaltum or pine pitch, and then you have a bowl that you can use to eat out of or serve water and things like that. This net here, the Chumash would take their cordage and make nets either to catch fish with or to use as a basket to carry whatever the catch of the day was. So if you caught fish or small game, you can put them in your net here and then just tie it around your waist. So these are just a few of the things here in our Chumash museum that we let the kids touch and feel and learn about how the Chumash lived.
Well, part of the things that I do in my educational aspect of learning and working with the Chumash culture is working with the physical world. And one of the things that we teach people are the misconceptions and stereotypes of Chumash culture in terms of, oh, all Indian people beat drums. Well, this item here, elderberry, is called an askatata. It's a clapper stick. This is going to make a nice sound because it's real heavy and solid. And this was our main percussion instrument. It was used in many ceremonies. And I go out and I gather this out in the different areas. What I have to do, there's many different stages of creating an askataka. The first is going out into areas where the elderberry is growing in places. I have a couple places that are on private property where I gather my elderberry. And then I have to let it sit, so I have some out in my yard sitting and curing for a while. You got to peel the bark. There's several different layers of bark on the clapper sticks that you have to get off. So the top layer is the first one, and prior to having all these modern tools and conveniences, your fingernails, first of all, is a good tool and a reason not to bite your nails, that you can peel this bark off. Other than that, I can use a shell, a little clam shell that is used to scrape off and peel back the first layer of bark. And so that's another way of getting it off. Or if I were lucky and I had an obsidian blade with a volcanic glass from the desert, I would have a knife blade that I would use. But one of the great things I like about living in modern day society is my pocket knife. And that is real convenient because that just strips this bark off right away. So those are some of the steps that start your askataka. What Paul is doing over here on the second step is taking out the center pith. Now, each clapper stick is different. Hers doesn't have, one side is pretty thick, the other side is narrow. They all have a different diameter on the inside, and it gives it, like once you try yours now, since you have it hollow, let them hear the sound. That's pretty rich. This one here that has a big center that's already cleared out, this one's ready to decorate and paint. It's going to have a lot more hollow sound and a higher pitch. Now, the askataka had different rhythms, about 3. One was a single rhythm, kept keeping time. Another one was a double, and then a very rapid rhythm when the music or the dancing was get people very excited and listening to that rhythm, get them going. So we have our summer camps in which we gather these up and bring them out, and we have children anywhere from 9 to 12 years old working on these, and they find it. Their emotions are a little mixed when they make the ascataka, especially when it comes to the sanding, because there's, like I said, there was 3 different levels of bark. The outer bark, a very stringy or middle bark, and then one that is, let me see yours here, because we have this one all stripped, where we use different levels and gauges of sandpaper. So with the 60 grade sandpaper, now what would we use before sandpaper?
We would do shark skin.
Yeah, and then that dried shark skin. And then there was a plant. You remember the name of that plant?
It was the horsetail.
Yeah, the equisetum, which gave, when you got all the different levels of bark off, you'd use the equisetum and it gave it a nice, smooth, very soft finish like this one here. But again, with modern conveniences, we do the different levels. So we have a 60 grade, we have a 150 grade, and we have a 220 grade. And that 220 gives your clapper stick a nice, smooth finish so that it can be prepared for the different paints. Now today we use acrylic paints and paint brushes. We would have in the olden times the charcoal, manganese for the black, hematite ochre for the red, and what was the white? The white's always, it was that chalk.
I never really remember it too well.
Well, I think it's called diatomaceous earth. So, but what about paintbrushes? You know, we didn't have these plastic paintbrushes.
It was the yucca plants, because the yucca plants, they're very, when you get rid of all the green inside of it, they can fan out and create our string and a lot of cordage materials to use to, make it. So it would just take one strand of it and spread it out at the end and use that to paint it.
I thought the little tails we used too.
Yeah, bobcats or stuff like
squirrels. Yeah, so we had those different types of things for paintbrushes, and the paints would be used and mixed with animal fat or bird eggs, and that kind of kept it on the wood. So when Paula was young, we were doing programs out at Ventura Museum, and I had her, about at the age of 7 or 8, making clapper sticks, and I told her she could make them any color she wanted. So her first one was a rainbow color. Our traditional Chumash colors are black, white, and red. Black being rain, red being fire, and white being wind. So her next one was Pokemon. And at that age, I didn't care. I think she was about 9 when she did this one. And I said, I don't care what you paint it, just paint it. So got Charmander and Squirtle there. Then she started working into seeing shapes and figures into her clapper sticks. And so that one, maybe I'll hold it up and show the toucan. Well, there's a toucan on one end with his beak. And then she said, tell him about the other one.
Here, and then there's the bear at the end, because you can see its nose. So look at that.
So that's when I work with the kids. I just say, just kind of use your imagination. And I love the green one.
It's a gator. It's not done yet, but either way, most of the time at the end of the clapper stick, you usually wrap sinew around it, to give it a better brace to hold on to it. So
now what's the sinew?
This is the sinew. You get that out. And you usually wrap it around, and eventually you decorate it with feathers, beads, all sorts of other cool stuff that you find around. And, a lot of times clapper sticks are almost meant as, just your own personal talking stick, and that you can decorate it, and, you not only just make more, but keep improving the ones that you have. So that's what, half of it is that his tail is supposed to wrap all the way around, but they still have just the grip at the end.
So we make these for ourselves, and now I have a whole collection of my younger daughter's clapper sticks that she's started making when she was 7, coming to the Chumash camps and stuff. So that's nice to have all these collections. We take these into the classrooms where the children can have hands-on playing and learning some of the Chumash songs with them, and we bring rattles and made from the mussel shell and turtle shells and deer hoof rattles. But I don't have my father's with me right now, but they sure like using the one I have. So we sell them from time to time. We don't make a big market, although people are interested in buying them from time to time, and depending on how we make them and how fancy, they're not very expensive at all. And one of the things that we don't do is that when we sell them, we don't put feathers of the different birds on them, like hawk or eagle or owl, because it's illegal to do that, because all these birds are protected. So we just paint them up, and sometimes we have little parrot feathers that we find, or we get the feathers down from Michael's and decorate them, a little fancy. So we have fun doing these, and it's relaxing. It's relaxing to sit, and I love being out in the outdoors and gathering them. I try not to gather them while they're blooming or have their berries, because, you know, elderberry, and working with native plants, we find that there are so many different purposes. The berries were a food source. They weren't real sweet, but in those days when you don't have a lot of sweet foods, elderberries were very, very welcome in their time and their season. We're in early, not even, well, just starting to have a spring, and the elderberries just beginning to bloom. The blossoms were a medicine. When you dried the blossoms of the elderberry, you made a tea out of them, and you drank that tea when you had bronchitis or chest cold, and it helped to break up that phlegm in the chest. And smaller branches of the elderberry we turn into whistles. We plug up one end of these little 3-inch tubes, hollowed completely out, and then we plug one end up with the asphaltum or the tar, and after that dries we can blow into it, and it makes a very high-pitched sound. So here's my Ascatatka, almost completed and ready for its next stages.